In the quiet village of Nthabini, nestled between rolling hills and dense, whispering forests, lived a girl named Ayana. She was 12 years old, with eyes that seemed to notice everything, a mind sharp as the edge of a newly forged blade, and a gentle curiosity that drew others to her. Her presence was calm yet compelling, and even the most reticent villagers could not help but be intrigued by her perceptive nature. Ayana was observant in ways that sometimes startled those around her. She noticed small changes in the wind, subtle shifts in people's expressions, and the tiniest details that often went unnoticed by adults. Her curiosity was boundless, and she approached life with a mixture of wonder and intelligence, always asking questions, seeking understanding, and quietly storing knowledge for moments when it might be needed most. The village itself was a place steeped in tradition and spiritual awareness. The homes, crafted from sun-baked clay and wooden beams, formed a ring around the central gathering place where ceremonies and festivals were held. Crops of millet and maize swayed in the breeze, their growth intimately tied to the careful observation of seasonal patterns and the rituals performed to honor the spirits of the land. The villagers believed that perception and insight were gifts, that those who could truly see beyond the ordinary were blessed by the ancestors. Sight was revered not merely as a physical sense but as a bridge to understanding, wisdom, and the unseen forces that influenced daily life. Ayana, with her sharp eyes and acute awareness, often found herself called upon by neighbors seeking advice on matters both mundane and mystical, though she was too young to fully grasp the weight of such responsibilities. Her family lived at the edge of the village, in a modest home shaded by ancient trees whose roots dug deep into the soil, entwining history and memory with every twist. Her father, a kind but often distracted man, worked in the fields and rarely noticed the small ways his daughter observed the world. Her stepmother, Imani, was a woman of stern demeanor, whose jealousy and suspicion simmered quietly beneath the surface. Imani's own children, if she had any, were distant cousins, raised in a separate part of the house, leaving Ayana as the stepmother's primary focus for scrutiny and control. Though Ayana's father meant no harm, his inattention allowed Imani's quiet envy to fester unchecked. She watched Ayana with a mixture of disdain and fear, wary of the girl's keen insight, her ability to perceive subtle truths, and the admiration the villagers showed her. From the earliest days, small tensions wove themselves into the fabric of Ayana's life. Villagers whispered about her uncanny awareness, speaking of the child who seemed to see not only what was present but what was hidden in shadows. Imani, sensitive to the admiration and attention Ayana received, grew increasingly wary. Her envy was veiled behind smiles and polite words, yet in the quiet moments she plotted, her thoughts darkening as she contemplated ways to limit the girl's growing influence. The tension in the home was subtle but palpable, a low hum that Ayana sensed even before fully understanding it. The stage was set, a girl of perception and insight, a village that revered sight and understanding, and a family in which envy and fear quietly threatened to disrupt the natural balance of her life. Life in Ayana's home had become a daily exercise in endurance, a subtle war fought in the quiet spaces between chores and meals. Her stepmother, Imani, ruled the household with a precision that left little room for joy or freedom. Every task was monitored, every movement scrutinized, and every misstep, no matter how minor, was met with sharp words or a piercing glare. Ayana's mornings began with the pounding rhythm of fetching water, grinding grains, and sweeping the yard under Imani's watchful eye. If a pot was left slightly askew or a broomstroke faltered, Imani's voice would slice through the air like a whip, reminding Ayana that perfection was demanded, obedience expected, and any sign of independence or defiance would be met with consequence. The verbal cruelty, however, was not the full extent of Imani's malice. She wielded psychological manipulation with cunning subtlety, planting seeds of doubt in Ayana's mind while simultaneously undermining her confidence in front of neighbors. A compliment from a visiting villager would be met with a pointed remark or a dismissive tone, as if to claim that the girl's abilities were unearned or undeserving. Imani's envy was relentless. She feared Ayana's perceptiveness, her ability to notice hidden truths, and the effortless charm with which the girl interacted with the villagers. Each smile from Ayana, each act of kindness, only fueled Imani's resentment, leaving her restless and plotting as she paced the walls of the small, shaded home. Amidst this tension, mystical whispers threaded through the village like the wind through the trees. Rumors circulated of spirits who observed those with insight, of omens in the forest where eyes gleamed in the darkness, and of forces that could see beyond death itself. Villagers occasionally murmured about children whose visions were more than ordinary sight, who could glimpse truths hidden from the common eye. Imani, dismissive at first, ignored these signs as superstition, Yet her discomfort grew as the stories seemed to follow Ayana wherever she went. The girl, though young, sensed these murmurs and the weight of expectation that came with them. She began to notice subtle shadows in the corners of rooms, faint shapes in the forest at twilight, and the feeling of unseen eyes observing her every action, which she would later understand were protective, mystical watchers rather than threats. Step by step, Imani's plotting deepened. She began to research ways to diminish Ayana's influence and control her remarkable insight. She spoke to wandering elders and women reputed to know charms, subtly probing for knowledge of rituals that could blind, silence, or otherwise limit a perceptive child. She experimented with herbs and whispered incantations, testing their effects on minor household matters, all while concealing her intentions beneath a veneer of concern and instruction. Each plan was carefully calculated, the timing, the method, and the audience considered with meticulous care. Imani sought not merely to punish but to silence the girl's mind and spirit, believing that control over Ayana's perception equated to control over the household and the subtle admiration of the village. By the end of each day, Ayana returned to her small corner of the home, weary yet quietly observing, cataloging, and understanding. The shadow of Imani's malice loomed over her, a constant presence she could feel pressing against her thoughts. Yet even in these moments, there remained a spark within Ayana, a curiosity, resilience, and strength, that whispered to her of things yet unseen, of magic waiting, and of a power that could not be extinguished by cruelty. The tension between stepmother and child was now fully woven into the fabric of daily life, setting the stage for a confrontation that would reach far beyond ordinary family strife, touching the mystical, the moral, and the elemental forces that shaped their world. The night was thick with an unnatural stillness, the kind that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of something dark. Inside the small, dimly lit hut, Imani moved with a calculated precision, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and secret excitement. She had planned this night for weeks, gathering ash from burnt herbs, carefully chosen incense, and powders whispered about in hushed village tales for their mystical potency. Every movement was deliberate, every sound controlled, so that the ritual would unfold exactly as she intended. She called Ayana to the center of the room, offering a smile that barely concealed the malice in her eyes, her voice soft and coaxing but carrying an undercurrent of command that brooked no refusal. Ayana, innocent and unaware of the true danger, obeyed. She stepped forward, her keen eyes flicking nervously to the flickering candlelight, sensing an unusual tension in the air. The shadows cast by the dancing flames seemed to stretch unnaturally, slithering along the walls and floor as though alive, but Ayana's sharp mind could not yet comprehend that the forces of the unseen were stirring in response to the cruelty that was about to unfold. Imani began her chants, murmuring in a rhythm that made the hairs on Ayana's arms stand on end. Strange symbols, jagged and flowing all at once, were drawn on the floor in ash, forming circles and lines that pulsed faintly in the candlelight. The air grew heavier with each whispered syllable, thickening with anticipation and the latent power of the ritual. Then, without warning, Imani thrust the ash forward, pressing it against Ayana's face. The girl gasped as it clung to her skin, inhaling the fine particles that filled her nose and mouth. Panic surged immediately, the sensation suffocating, as though the very air around her had turned to stone. Her eyes watered, her throat burned, and for the first time in her young life, fear seized her body completely. She struggled, but Imani's grip was unyielding, holding her firmly while continuing the chant, ensuring that each word bound the ritual's power to Ayana. The smell of burned herbs mixed with smoke and ash, clinging to the air in thick, almost tangible layers, making the room feel like a world suspended between the living and the unseen. Yet even in this moment of terror, the natural and mystical world began to respond. The ash itself, expected to be inert and lifeless, began to shimmer faintly. Tiny glimmers danced across its surface, forming subtle, shifting shapes. Ayana's sharp eyes, though partially obscured, caught glimpses of patterns that moved independently, as if the ash had a life of its own. The faintest outlines of eyes appeared, blinking slowly, observing, reacting to her panic. The wind outside stirred despite the closed windows, rustling the trees with an urgent whisper, carrying faint echoes of distant voices that seemed to murmur words of warning and comfort. Birds fell silent in the nearby branches, as if sensing the unnatural tension inside the hut, and even the flames of the candles flickered in response to the growing magical resonance. Ayana's instinctive fear was now coupled with a strange awe. Though suffocated and terrified, she felt that the ash was not entirely under Imani's control. Subtle patterns of light and movement teased at her mind, suggesting that something protective, hidden, and persistent lingered within her very torment. The edges of the ash eyes seemed to pulse, faintly echoing her own heartbeat, and though she could barely breathe, a spark of recognition ignited within her. This darkness could not entirely conquer her. The forces of perception and resilience were stirring in ways even Imani could not anticipate. The ritual continued through the night, Imani's chants relentless, her power focused on suppressing Ayana's insight. But the subtle mystical signs grew stronger. Shapes coalesced, forming faint eyes that never fully closed, staring unblinkingly into the shadows of the hut. Even as Ayana gasped for air, the first threads of her magical perception began to awaken, fed by the cruelty imposed upon her. The hut, the ash, and the night itself seemed to vibrate with potential, hinting that this moment of terror was not an end, but the beginning of a transformation that would surpass anything Imani had imagined. Life after the ashing ritual became a delicate and grueling test of endurance for Ayana. Each day, she awoke to the weight of the ash on her face, a suffocating barrier that obscured the world and separated her from the warm recognition of familiar eyes. Walking through the house required painstaking caution, each step measured to avoid knocking into walls, furniture, or the small belongings scattered across the floor. Simple chores, once familiar, became treacherous exercises in navigation. Cooking, fetching water, tending to the fire, and sweeping the floor now demanded constant awareness, not only of her surroundings but of the ever-present ash that clung to her skin, her hair, and the air around her. Each movement was shadowed by the fear of stumbling, of being scolded further by her stepmother, who now observed her with an insidious satisfaction, reveling in the control she believed she had finally secured. Beyond the walls of her home, the village became a landscape of whispers and confusion. Villagers recoiled, unsure how to interact with Ayana, whose face was now a mask of gray, its features erased beneath layers of mystical ash. Children avoided her gaze, their innocent curiosity replaced by an instinctive fear. Adults whispered cautionary words, their voices tinged with both concern and awe, speaking of curses, omens, and eyes that see beyond understanding. For Ayana, the isolation was profound. Words failed her, gestures often misunderstood, and smiles no longer reached the hearts of those she had once charmed with her gentle nature. Despair threatened to consume her, pressing in from all sides, yet within that shadow of sorrow sparks of resilience and insight glimmered, refusing to be extinguished by cruelty. The mystical elements that had first whispered during the ritual now began to reveal themselves more clearly. The ash on her face, once inert and suffocating, seemed to move subtly with her emotions. Tiny currents shifted as she inhaled or exhaled, faint patterns forming and dissolving with each breath. Shadows in corners appeared to stretch and twist with intent, suggesting eyes that observed and whispered guidance. The forest beyond the village hummed faintly, its spirits recognizing the injustice inflicted upon her. Leaves rustled in unusual patterns, animals moved with a cautious awareness, and even the wind seemed to carry murmurs that only Ayana could perceive. Though she could not speak or remove the ash entirely, she began to realize that the world was speaking to her in ways that transcended ordinary senses. Among the muted companions she encountered during her isolation were figures who provided subtle guidance without drawing attention to themselves. A wise elder, known for knowledge of herbs and hidden magics, left small gifts at her doorstep: a carved amulet, a bundle of protective herbs, a silent nod of reassurance in passing. A secret friend, perhaps a cousin or fellow child of the village, risked defying the stepmother to leave notes of encouragement, clever instructions for navigating difficult areas, and reminders that Ayana's spirit could not be contained. And then there were the mystical animals, shadows in the trees, eyes glinting in the night, who appeared as silent guides, pointing her toward safe paths, alerting her to unseen dangers, and offering companionship that transcended speech. Their presence comforted her, reinforcing the notion that even in darkness, she was never truly alone. Through these trials, Ayana's mind grew sharper, her awareness more precise. Each obstacle, each fearful encounter, honed her perceptiveness, and each whisper of mystical guidance strengthened her resolve. She began to learn the subtle language of ash and shadow, to read the forest signs, and to trust the instincts that had once made her keenly observant. Though the daily struggle was immense and the isolation heavy, her inner world flourished, a hidden garden of insight and resilience nourished by adversity. The ashing that had been intended to suppress her vision and spirit instead became a crucible, forging a girl who, though veiled and constrained, was quietly preparing for a destiny far beyond the understanding of those who sought to diminish her. As the days turned into weeks, Ayana began to notice something extraordinary. The ash that covered her face, once simply a suffocating barrier, began to reveal secrets hidden within its shifting patterns. Tiny shapes emerged and dissolved in the gray dust, almost imperceptible at first, like fleeting shadows dancing at the edge of her vision. Sometimes they appeared as faint outlines of eyes, blinking slowly and observing, as if the ash itself had become a sentient layer, responding to her thoughts and emotions. Other times, shapes of animals or small figures would shimmer within the ash, moving in ways that defied the natural laws of the village. Ayana's heart raced with a mixture of fear and awe, realizing that the very thing intended to suppress her, her veil of ash, was instead granting her a new form of perception, one that went beyond ordinary sight. The natural world around her seemed to acknowledge this awakening. The wind, which had once carried only the sounds of distant trees and flowing rivers, began to whisper with purpose, echoing her movements and moods. It would swirl around her when she concentrated, shifting leaves into patterns that felt like messages, bending small branches toward her as if pointing the way. Animals in the forest and village exhibited behaviors that no longer seemed coincidental. Birds would land in her line of vision and tilt their heads knowingly. Small mammals would freeze and watch her, then scurry along paths that led to safety or secret spaces. Even the rivers seemed to respond, their ripples catching the moonlight in ways that highlighted safe crossings or hidden dangers. Every interaction between Ayana and the natural world reinforced the growing realization that her perception had extended beyond the human norms, forming a subtle but undeniable magical vigilance. At first, these phenomena were fragmented and confusing. Shapes flickered too quickly to understand, animals moved unpredictably, and the wind's whispers were indecipherable, carrying words that sounded almost like echoes of language. Yet, through persistent observation and reflection, Ayana began to piece together a pattern. The ash eyes appeared when danger or deceit lurked nearby, flickering in the presence of those who harbored malice. Birds and small creatures acted as guides, showing the safest paths and signaling potential threats. The wind carried subtle cues, the bending of leaves or the rustling of branches indicating direction, timing, or the approach of strangers. Slowly, these signs coalesced into a coherent language, a magical dialogue that connected Ayana to the world in a way she had never experienced before. The villagers too began to notice anomalies, though they did not understand their source. Livestock behaved strangely when Ayana passed, avoiding certain areas or gathering as if sensing something unseen. Crops seemed to respond to her presence, growing with unusual vitality in places she had tended. People whispered about the girl with the ash-covered face, unsure if the events surrounding her were a blessing or a curse. Some feared her, thinking she had been marked by spirits or some dark magic. Others were drawn to her, sensing that she carried power and insight that could not be explained. Despite their confusion, Ayana's growing awareness and the reactions of the natural world signaled that something remarkable was unfolding. With each passing day, Ayana's understanding deepened. She began to experiment, concentrating on her intentions and watching how the ash and the natural world responded. Shapes became clearer, movements more deliberate, and the faint eyes within the ash grew more expressive, reflecting her thoughts and guiding her actions. Her magical sight, once an accidental consequence of cruelty, now became a tool for navigation, understanding, and self-preservation. The veil of ash that had been intended to blind her had instead opened her to a world of perception that few humans had ever glimpsed. In this way, Ayana discovered that true vision is not limited to the eyes but is a connection between mind, spirit, and the forces that surround all living beings, and she began to embrace the extraordinary potential hidden within her suffering. Ayana had grown more attuned to the subtle signals of the world around her, and one quiet morning, guided by the whispering wind and the faint shimmer of the ash eyes on her face, she stumbled upon a hidden corner of the house she had never noticed before. Behind a loose wooden panel in the floorboards, she discovered a small, dust-covered box. Inside lay a collection of items that revealed the full extent of her stepmother's cruelty. A journal filled with meticulous notes, sketches of symbols, and the stepmother's own plans to suppress and control her perception. The pages were heavy with malice and obsession, detailing the rituals, herbs, and incantations used to cover Ayana in ash and bind her spirit. Each word sent a shiver through the girl, a mixture of fear and vindication, as the whispers of injustice she had felt all along were confirmed in undeniable detail. As Ayana examined the journal, memories of the ashing ritual surged vividly in her mind. The flickering candlelight, the pungent scent of burned herbs, the symbols drawn on the floor, and the hushed chants all returned in sharp relief. She recalled the suffocating panic, the terror of having her vision obscured, and the faint, uncanny shimmer of the ash eyes that had first whispered of her latent power. Each flashback brought both sorrow and a spark of anger, for she now understood that the suffering imposed upon her had been deliberate, methodical, and deeply personal. The ash that had smothered her face, the thing she had feared would blind and isolate her forever, had instead been imbued with a strange vitality, a residual magic that now served as her ally. Mystical signs had guided her to this revelation. The subtle movements of leaves outside the window, the cautious approach of a small fox whose eyes reflected understanding, and the whispers of wind that carried faint syllables of guidance all seemed to converge in this moment. These forces had led her to the journal, affirming that even in the face of cruelty, the unseen world was watching and aiding her. Ayana felt a swelling sense of connection, a confirmation that her perceptions, sharpened by the ash, were not only accurate but part of a larger, protective tapestry woven by the natural and mystical realms. As the depth of the stepmother's wickedness became clear, Ayana's emotions surged in a complex, almost overwhelming wave. Anger burned fiercely in her chest, a righteous fire fueled by the deliberate harm done to her body and spirit. Sorrow weighed heavily, a deep mourning for the innocence and freedom that had been stolen from her. Yet intertwined with these powerful emotions was a resolute desire for justice. She knew that the magic she had begun to cultivate, the vigilance of the ash eyes, the subtle guidance of nature, and the whispers of mystical allies, was a force that could not be contained, a force that might one day hold the stepmother accountable for the cruelty she had inflicted. Meanwhile, Imani's paranoia began to rise as she sensed that something beyond her control was unfolding. Strange occurrences in the household, the flutter of shadows, the uncanny behavior of animals, and the subtle shimmer of the ash that refused to stay inert, made her uneasy. She could not pinpoint the source of the disturbances, and each unexplained event intensified her fear that the carefully laid plans to dominate and suppress Ayana were beginning to unravel. The woman who had once wielded fear and manipulation with precision now found herself subject to anxiety, suspicion, and creeping dread, as the very magic she had sought to control emerged stronger than she had anticipated. In this way, the discovery of the stepmother's crime became a pivotal moment for Ayana. She now understood the full scope of her suffering, recognized the latent power within her, and felt a rising determination to confront injustice. The balance of fear and control that had dominated her life for so long was shifting, and Ayana, guided by insight, resilience, and mystical allies, was preparing to reclaim her strength and shape her destiny. Under the cover of a pre-dawn mist, Ayana slipped quietly from her home, careful to avoid the prying eyes of her stepmother. The path ahead led into the dense forest that bordered the village, a place where sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and where shadows shifted in ways that seemed almost alive. Each step was measured, her senses alert to every sound, every rustle, and every subtle change in the environment. The ash on her face, now beginning to feel less like a curse and more like an extension of herself, shimmered faintly as if aware of the journey she had embarked upon. Tiny shapes moved within it, eyes blinking and observing, attuned to dangers she could not yet fully comprehend, yet prepared to guide and protect her. As she ventured deeper, the forest seemed to acknowledge her presence. Leaves whispered in cryptic patterns, guiding her away from treacherous roots and hidden hollows. Animals, from foxes to small birds with luminous eyes, appeared along her path, silently watching and occasionally nudging her in the right direction. She realized that the world around her was now a partner in her quest, a reflection of the magical perception the ash had begun to cultivate. Shadows moved not as threats but as sentinels, hinting at safe paths and warning of unseen dangers. Each trial along the way demanded her courage. Each shadow and whisper tested her patience and intelligence, for the forest was alive not only with mystical creatures but with lessons hidden in subtle, often perilous ways. The first challenge came in the form of a clearing dominated by an ancient tree, its gnarled roots forming a natural labyrinth. Spirits, neither fully corporeal nor entirely invisible, emerged to assess her intent. They watched silently, their forms flickering between solid and ethereal, their eyes reflecting both wisdom and scrutiny. Ayana bowed her head respectfully, acknowledging their presence. To pass, she had to demonstrate perception beyond what ordinary eyes could see. She observed minute shifts in the roots, the faint echoes of wind along the branches, and the almost imperceptible hum that resonated with her heartbeat. By aligning her movements with these subtle cues, she navigated the labyrinth successfully, the ash eyes on her face multiplying, forming a network of vigilant observers that seemed to extend her own magical perception. Further along, a narrow river blocked her path. Its waters shimmered with an unusual luminescence, and across the banks, creatures of myth, serpentine beings and luminous birds, watched intently. Ayana understood that the crossing was another test. Patience and intelligence were required to read the currents, predict the creature's movements, and step safely from stone to stone without disturbing the balance of the river. Each cautious movement strengthened her control over the magical vigilance now residing in the ash eyes. She realized that the more she trusted this new perception, the more precise and responsive it became. The eyes, once passive, were now active extensions of her awareness, moving independently yet harmonizing perfectly with her intentions. Word of her absence traveled quickly to Imani. The stepmother, sensing that her control was slipping and fearing the awakening of powers she could neither understand nor suppress, dispatched minions and cursed messengers into the forest. Darkened shadows, carrying whispered threats and the scent of malevolence, sought to intercept Ayana before she could reach the sacred site. Yet with every attempted ambush, the ash eyes acted as vigilant guides. They blinked in synchronization with her intentions, revealing hidden pathways, alerting her to danger, and even forming protective shapes that subtly deflected attacks. Ayana's courage and intelligence allowed her to anticipate threats, while her patience ensured she moved carefully, never overstepping or misjudging the rhythm of the forest's magic. By the time she reached the edge of a sacred mountain rising above the treetops, the ash had transformed fully into a network of persistent, vigilant eyes. They scanned her surroundings continuously, attuned to both physical and mystical threats. The air around the mountain hummed with latent energy, and the spirits of the place greeted her arrival with approval. Each eye within the ash seemed to pulse in recognition, echoing her heartbeat and resonating with the latent power she had begun to cultivate. Her magical sight, born from suffering and sharpened through trials, had become a profound force, extending her awareness far beyond ordinary human limits. As the first light of dawn painted the forest in pale gold, Ayana paused to take in the magnitude of her journey. She had ventured from the oppression of her home into a realm of mystical guidance and personal discovery, facing challenges that demanded every ounce of courage, patience, and intelligence she possessed. The ash eyes, once a symbol of her victimization, were now her greatest allies, transforming her perception into something both magical and enduring. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation with her stepmother, who, despite sending minions and curses, had no understanding of the depth of power now coursing through Ayana. The forest, the spirits, and the ash eyes were aligned, and Ayana's journey to reclaim her vision, both literal and mystical, was only beginning. The moment Ayana fully embraced the magic within the ash, a transformation began that even the forest seemed to recognize. The countless vigilant eyes formed in the ash covering her face widened and opened with deliberate clarity, blinking and observing independently, yet moving in harmony with her thoughts. It was as though every fragment of the ash had become a portal, granting her vision far beyond what ordinary eyes could perceive. She could see the minutest shifts in the environment, the subtle sway of branches that indicated approaching creatures, the invisible currents of energy that ran through the rivers, and the hidden pathways of light and shadow that connected the forest in ways no villager could imagine. Each blink of the ash eyes felt like a note in a symphony, a chord that resonated with both the physical and mystical worlds, making her perception both acute and profound. As Ayana's new vision awakened, the natural world responded dramatically. The wind picked up with a sudden rush, swirling around her in circular currents, carrying the scents and sounds of the forest with heightened intensity. Leaves trembled and danced even without a breeze, forming patterns that seemed to echo her thoughts. Animals, from the smallest insects to the larger mammals, reacted as if recognizing her newfound power. Birds sang in complex sequences, foxes trotted along hidden paths to signal warnings, and even the rivers seemed to shimmer more vividly, their currents twisting to reflect the rhythm of her heartbeat. Flowers opened with unnatural speed, their petals unfurling toward her as though in reverence. The very earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with life, responding to the awakening force she now wielded. News of the phenomenon spread quickly. Villagers emerged cautiously from their homes and fields, witnessing the incredible events unfolding before their eyes. They saw storms materializing in the distance, clouds roiling and lightning dancing with an almost sentient grace. Beams of light fractured through the treetops, illuminating the ash eyes as they shifted, blinked, and scanned the landscape. Even those who had doubted or feared Ayana could not ignore the awe-inspiring display of mystical power. Some whispered prayers of wonder, others fell to their knees in fear, and a few approached cautiously, driven by admiration for the girl who had endured so much and yet now commanded such extraordinary abilities. The villagers, who once treated her with hesitation and confusion, now recognized that she carried a force of nature within her, a guardian not only of herself but of the balance between the natural and mystical realms. Meanwhile, Imani's rage and fear escalated. She attempted to suppress the emerging power in every way she could imagine. She shouted, tried to shroud Ayana in darkness, and even attempted to invoke minor curses, but each effort failed against the resilience of the Ash Eyes. No spell, no shout, and no act of intimidation could halt the symphony of perception that now flowed through Ayana. The Ash Eyes acted independently, forming protective barriers, deflecting threats and revealing hidden pathways, making it impossible for the stepmother to gain control. Every attempt she made only highlighted her impotence in the face of a power that had been forged by cruelty but transformed by courage, patience, and mystical guidance. With each passing moment, Ayana became more attuned to her new sight. She could perceive intentions, detect hidden dangers, and understand the emotions of both humans and creatures with unprecedented clarity. The Ash Eyes communicated silently with her, a constant network of awareness that made her nearly omniscient within her surroundings. Even the subtler signs, like shifts in the wind or the ripple of the river, spoke to her, confirming that she had moved beyond ordinary perception. Her mystical vision was no longer merely reactive, it was proactive, enabling her to anticipate events and respond with wisdom and precision. By the time the first moonlight touched the treetops, the forest and village alike had witnessed the full awakening of Ayana's magical sight. The Ash Eyes had matured into a vigilant and independent force, inseparable from her being, granting her insight that could not be silenced, obscured, or broken. The stepmother's attempts at suppression were now futile, and the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Ayana, who had once been a victim of envy and cruelty, now commanded perception, awareness, and influence far beyond her years. The eyes that had been imposed upon her as punishment had become her greatest strength, and the world around her, wind, animals, rivers, and people, responded in recognition of the force she had become. The day of confrontation arrived with the air thick and heavy, a foreboding stillness that seemed to hold the breath of the entire village. Ayana, her face still marked by the Ash Eyes now fully awake, approached her home with calm determination. The forest and the spirits that had guided her along her journey seemed to part respectfully, allowing her passage as if acknowledging that the time for reckoning had come. She could feel every movement, every heartbeat, and every intention in her surroundings with uncanny clarity. Even before reaching the gates of her home, Ayana sensed the stepmother's presence, her malice radiating like a dark cloud that quivered under the unseen force Ayana now wielded. Stepping through the door, Ayana found Imani waiting, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. The stepmother had prepared her usual arsenal of tricks, curses muttered under her breath, vials of potent herbs intended to cloud perception, and threatening gestures meant to intimidate, but Ayana remained calm. Each attempt of the stepmother was anticipated and countered with a simple shift of gaze from the Ash Eyes. They moved independently, blinking in synchronization with Ayana's understanding, revealing the hidden intentions behind each attack, deflecting threats and signaling safe paths. The very shadows in the room seemed to join Ayana, stretching to mirror her resolve and turning Imani's tricks into harmless, ineffective gestures. The clash of wills intensified as the stepmother's fury grew. She unleashed verbal assaults, mocking Ayana's appearance and belittling her efforts, but the girl's perception went beyond words. Through the mystical eyes, Ayana could perceive fear, envy, and the cracking of Imani's confidence beneath the surface. Each syllable of threat or insult was met with silent comprehension, a strategic response guided not by brute force but by intelligence and precision. She moved with fluidity and grace, her every action supported by the vigilant network of Ash Eyes, which blinked warnings, revealed weaknesses, and guided her toward the optimal course of action. Stepmother's magic, once seemingly powerful and oppressive, now faltered before the harmonized awareness of Ayana. Potions splashed uselessly, charms disintegrated in the air, and words of incantation fell into silence as if the very world refused to recognize them. The forest spirits and mystical animals that had accompanied Ayana subtly influenced the outcome. A gust of wind extinguished a threatening candle, a fox darted across the threshold to trip a misfired curse, and the shadows bent in ways that exposed Imani's vulnerabilities. Step by step, Ayana demonstrated that cleverness and insight, powered by the magical vision of the Ash Eyes, could triumph over cruelty, malice, and brute control. The punishment for Imani was both symbolic and absolute. In one final act, the stepmother's own rituals and curses backfired, tangled in the very forces she had sought to dominate. The Ash Eyes glimmered as they projected a vision of her misdeeds, reflecting them outward until she could see her cruelty mirrored in every corner of the home. Villagers, drawn by the commotion, witnessed Imani's humiliation as her spells unraveled, leaving her powerless and exposed. Yet Ayana did not exact vengeance through harm. Instead, she allowed the natural consequences of the stepmother's actions to unfold, a lesson in justice guided by wisdom rather than anger. In that climactic moment, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. Ayana stood, calm and radiant, her eyes, both human and ash, blinking with awareness and authority. The village observed her with awe and respect, seeing not only a girl who had suffered but a young woman who had harnessed resilience, insight and mystical power to overcome injustice. Imani, now defeated, could only watch as Ayana demonstrated mercy, offering no retaliation, only the quiet wisdom that true strength does not lie in domination but in understanding, courage and the measured use of one's gifts. The confrontation ended not with destruction, but with restoration of moral and mystical balance. Ayana's presence radiated an unspoken message. Cruelty and envy, no matter how deeply rooted, cannot withstand the clarity, intelligence and perseverance of a spirit attuned to both the natural and mystical worlds. In the silence that followed, the villagers realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a triumph over a tyrant, but a demonstration of the power of perception, resilience, and the enduring truth that justice guided by wisdom is the most formidable force of all. In the days following the climactic confrontation, Ayana felt a profound shift within herself. The fear, pain and uncertainty that had once bound her seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a calm, focused strength that radiated from every movement. Her body, once constrained by both the ash and the stepmother's cruelty, regained its full vitality, yet the ash eyes remained, a permanent, mystical emblem of her endurance and perceptive power. They no longer symbolized suffering. Instead, they reflected her wisdom, courage and connection to the unseen forces of the world. Each blink, subtle yet deliberate, reminded her of the resilience she had cultivated and the trials she had overcome, and she carried this silent vigilance as both shield and gift, ready to guide and protect not only herself but those who sought her counsel. The village, long accustomed to whispers and rumors surrounding the girl with the ash-covered face, began to witness the tangible benefits of her restored power. Crops, previously struggling under the uncertainty of poor rains and untended fields, flourished as if responding to Ayana's renewed presence. Streams flowed with clarity and vitality, forests seemed more vibrant, and animals moved freely, signaling a restored balance in the natural world. Villagers emerged from their homes, initially with cautious curiosity, then with growing admiration, as they observed the harmony that her magical sight had ushered into the land. They saw her not as a victim of cruelty but as a guardian whose awareness extended beyond the ordinary, ensuring the continued prosperity and safety of the community. Ayana's influence expanded as she embraced her role as a seer and healer. She walked through the village with grace and confidence, offering guidance where confusion once reigned, and sharing the insights gained from her extraordinary perception. When villagers came to her with troubles, she listened with acute awareness, her ash eyes subtly discerning truth from deception, danger from safety. Her advice, tempered by patience and intelligence, restored balance to disputes, healed emotional wounds and prevented potential disasters before they could manifest. Young and old alike looked upon her with respect, knowing that her resilience had transformed her into someone whose wisdom was not merely learned, but forged in the fires of adversity. Beyond practical guidance, Ayana became a guardian of mystical knowledge. She taught the villagers to observe, to listen to the subtle rhythms of nature, and to recognize the messages carried by wind, water and wildlife. Children were drawn to her, learning to see not just with their eyes but with their intuition and awareness. She demonstrated that true strength was not in domination or cruelty but in resilience, perception and the careful, deliberate use of one's gifts. The ash eyes, once a symbol of oppression, became a revered emblem of empowerment, reminding everyone that even the harshest trials could be transformed into sources of wisdom and protection. As harmony returned to the village, Ayana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The cruelty she had endured, the magical awakenings she had experienced, and the confrontations she had faced all served as lessons in resilience and justice. She understood that natural balance was maintained not only through action but through perception, the careful observation of the world and the moral courage to act when injustice threatened it. Her story became an enduring testament to the power of inner strength and the mystical interconnectedness of life, illustrating that those who are attuned to the hidden rhythms of the world can wield influence that transcends mere physicality. In time, festivals and gatherings celebrated the harmony that Ayana had helped restore. Villagers sang songs of renewal, shared stories of the ash eyes, and offered gratitude to the girl whose suffering had transformed into protective power. Yet amidst the celebration, Ayana remained humble, aware that her strength was not solely her own, but a culmination of guidance from mystical allies, lessons learned through hardship, and the resilience of her spirit. She became a living symbol of justice that is tempered with mercy, showing that even those who have suffered deeply can emerge as beacons of wisdom and guardians of balance. Through this restoration and transformation, the village learned invaluable lessons. Cruelty and envy may cause suffering, but perception, courage, and inner strength can restore equilibrium. Those who endure injustice with patience and insight may emerge not only unbroken but more powerful than those who sought to suppress them. Ayana's ash eyes, ever vigilant, continued to watch over the village, ensuring that the natural and mystical balance remained, and that the legacy of resilience, perception, and justice would endure for generations to come.